All right, today we are diving into what could be the biggest shift in U.S. drug policy in half a century, the federal push to move cannabis from Schedule 1 down to Schedule 3. Now, a presidential order got the ball rolling, but you'd be wrong if you think it's a done deal. The path forward is an absolute mess of bureaucratic delays, billion-dollar tax feuds, and really tricky legal challenges. So let's get into it.
And before we jump in, a quick heads up, this explainer is sponsored by our friends at Marijuana School. So here's what we're covering. First, we'll navigate the administrative maze that's holding everything up. Then, we'll dig into the massive tax battle that's brewing with the IRS. After that, we'll look at how international treaties are throwing a wrench in the works. We'll also see what's happening on the ground in the states. And finally, we'll talk about what all of this really means for people. Okay, let's kick things off with the rescheduling maze. I mean, the president issued an order, right? Why isn't that enough to get this done? Well, as you're about to see, it is way more complicated than that. So let's just walk through the timeline to see how we got here. Things started off with a ton of momentum back in August 2023 when Health and Human Services officially recommended the move. We got a proposed rule, a new DEA administrator, even a presidential order to expedite everything. But then, look what happens. The Department of Justice misses a key deadline, and suddenly the whole process just grinds to a halt. As you can see, we're basically stuck in the mud. And this slide really shows you exactly why it's stuck. For starters, the DEA has had a pause on its own proceedings for over a year. The new person in charge won't even say if they support the change. And on top of that, the Attorney General has already blown a major deadline. It's all caught in the teeth of the Administrative Procedure Act, which is basically the super dense federal rulebook for how agencies do anything. And trust me, it is designed to be slow. Now, this bureaucratic mess has created a huge and very immediate consequence. And that brings us to our next section, a massive billion-dollar tax fight. To really get this, you have to understand this one little piece of the tax code, Section 280E. The law says that if you are trafficking a Schedule 1 drug, and yep, that includes every single state legal cannabis business, you are banned from deducting your normal, everyday business expenses. We are talking about the absolute basics, rent for your store, salaries for your employees, marketing, all of it. You can't write it off. So what does that actually mean for these businesses? Well, the result is just staggering. An effective federal tax rate of 70 to 90%. Just let that sink in for a second. Can you imagine running any business where 90 cents of every dollar of profit goes straight to taxes before you can even pay your staff? It has been absolutely crushing the entire legal industry for years. So, with rescheduling looking like it might finally happen, some of the biggest companies are making a huge gamble, a really high-stakes bet. They've just stopped paying these taxes. They are proactively challenging the IRS, basically telling them, come and get it. The result? A massive standoff over at least $1.6 billion in unpaid taxes. And that number is climbing every single day. And if you want to understand the scale of this, just look at one company. Trulieve alone is challenging $630 million in taxes. But the IRS is digging in its heels, saying, hey, the law is the law until it's officially changed. So you've got this colossal financial showdown brewing, casting a huge shadow over the entire industry. Okay, so we've got the bureaucracy and the billion-dollar tax war. But believe it or not, it gets even more complicated. And that brings us to the really complex legal hurdles, including international treaties. You can tell a lot by the specific words government agencies use. The Congressional Research Service, these are the nonpartisan experts who brief Congress, they used to say rescheduling was likely. But look at the new language from just this month. Now they're saying the Department of Justice may move it. It's a tiny word change, but in Washington speak, that's a massive red flag. It shows that even the experts are starting to have serious doubts. And here's one of the big reasons why. The U.S. signed on to this international treaty way back in 1961 that requires really strict controls on cannabis. So here's the kicker. Even if the DEA manages to finalize a new rule here at home, the entire move could get challenged in court because it might violate international law. It's just another huge tangled legal knot. Okay, so let's pull back from the international stage and see how all this chaos is playing out on the ground in the states, because these federal moves are having some really strange ripple effects on local and hemp markets. This is a wild one. While the federal government is talking about loosening the rules on marijuana, it's getting ready to absolutely hammer the hemp industry. The upcoming Farm Bill is looking to change how THC is measured. It's a super technical shift, moving from just delta 9 THC to total THC. But that tiny change would instantly make almost every single consumable hemp product you see on shelves today completely illegal. It's not a crackdown, it's basically an eradication of the industry. And even in states where adult use cannabis is legal, local governments are building their own walls. Just look at Lakeville, Minnesota. They're capping the number of retail licenses at just 6 for the whole city. And they're enforcing super strict zoning rules. So instead of one open national market, what we're actually getting is this crazy quilt of local rules, regulations, and prohibitions. So we've talked about laws, we've talked about taxes, we've talked about treaties, but what does all of this actually mean for people? Let's zoom out in our final section and look at the very real human cost and benefit of all this. It's really easy to hear the word rescheduling and think, right, problem solved. You know, that it's the magic bullet that's going to fix decades of bad policy. So rescheduling fixes everything, right?
Well, the answer is a hard no, not even close. As advocates at the Last Prisoner Project just pointed out, rescheduling does absolutely nothing retroactively. It doesn't help anyone still in prison for a cannabis offense, and it doesn't help clear the records of the millions who already have one. It's a step forward for business and science for sure, but it is not a social justice solution. And this leaves us in this deeply contradictory reality. On one hand, the science is finally starting to catch up, showing incredible benefits. We're seeing links to drops in crime, lower opioid use, and even new potential medical applications. But on the other hand, rescheduling won't change federal drug testing rules, so you can still get fired. And the very researchers trying to study all those benefits, they're still stuck waiting because the government itself missed its own deadlines. It's a complete paradox. So where do we go from here? Here's what you need to keep your eyes on. First, the big one. Will the DEA actually finalize this rule? Second, get ready for the court battles, because no matter what happens, lawsuits are guaranteed. Third, watch the 2026 Farm Bill, which will decide the entire future of the hemp industry. And finally, just watch the states, because many of them aren't waiting around for the federal government to figure this out. Which brings us to our final and maybe most important question. This historic shift to Schedule 3 is undeniably a huge turning point. But is it really the beginning of the end for the war on cannabis? Or is it just the start of a whole new set of battles on a completely different field? That's the question we're left with. Thanks for watching.